how would you explain to an ordinary member of the public why you earn as much as you earn?
I'm not sure I could explain it, to be absolutely honest. But I suppose I would say I have been with the BBC for a very long time, as in 50 years. I've been with the Today Room for 30 years. When I joined the BBC, I was earning a couple of grand a year, and gradually, over the years that followed, the many, many years that followed, I earned more and more. And then a few things happened, such as ITN coming along, and them poaching us and we poaching them, their newscasters in particular. That was when I took a big jump, I suppose, when I became a newsreader. I didn't ask for it, but they suggested to me that I should go freelance because I'd been on the staff as a foreign correspondent and all the rest of it. And so that meant I got a huge lift in my salary, unasked for, it has to be said. And then when I came to the Today programme 30 years ago, I got another bit of a lift, and then various other things happened. And it's kind of gone up and up and up.
So you make it sound very passive, as though...
I make it sound very passive because it was very passive. I at no stage went to the BBC and said, I demand more money because I'm absolutely bloody brilliant. I didn't do that.
And there wasn't ever a moment when someone, you went and said, I've got these people coming for me,
Well, actually, that did happen. I did have, I had a couple of approaches, one particularly serious one, as in they offered me a certain sum of money, roughly double what I was earning at the time. This was another radio station, 10-ish years ago, I can't remember exactly when. And I considered it, obviously, I considered it. Well, I had supper with them a couple of times, and then decided that, and this is, I know, desperately corny, but so what, I loved the BBC too much. I didn't want to leave. I've been with it for a very long time. It's treated me wonderfully well. And the idea of leaving the BBC, I found, I wanted to stay.
It's quite hard to sort of square these two sort of statements that...
Which two?
Well, that you'd stay at the BBC, you love the BBC, you love what you do, you have this sort of phenomenal perch on the Today programme, and
great job, a wonderful job.
And their decision to pay you so much money to keep you. I mean,
well, you would really need to ask the BBC that, wouldn't you? I mean, presumably, but anything I say here, it's kind of, you're inviting me to say something very silly that will condemn me out of my own mouth when I've nothing for which I should be condemned. But anything I say could easily be taken to be saying, God, I'm absolutely worth it. Now, I don't know whether I'm worth it. Of course I don't. I'd need to be staggeringly arrogant to claim that I was worth it. The fact is, the BBC made the calculation at various stages. The BBC has changed a lot over the years. The people in power today are different, and rightly so, in my view. But they have continued to believe, rightly or wrongly, that they want me to carry on doing the job, and so they've offered me more money, and I've accepted it. Now, I haven't kept accepting it, I have to say. A few years ago, I did offer, and it was accepted, a pay cut, and more recently, I've voluntarily taken a very large pay cut. So it hasn't all been in one direction, but whether they're paying me too much is not for me to say. How can I possibly answer that question?
I mean, you make a lot of your background in Splot.
Well, I don't think I've mentioned it in this interview, have I?
No, but when you were broadcasting Radio 4, your background...
Well, I think I would dispute that.
Okay. I knew it. I didn't have to look it up.
Well, that's possibly because I've been a journalist for nearly 60 years. So it's fairly unlikely, isn't it, that if I've been doing some of the most high-profile programmes in the country for a very, very long time, it's fairly unlikely that a little bit of my background would be... And anyway, I'm not exactly ashamed of having been brought up in Splot.
If you were to... I mean, your salary is roughly equal to almost all the licence fee income from the whole of Splot.
Well, no, that's complete rubbish. Do you know how many people live in Splot?
5,000 households.
5,000 households, yeah. 5,000 households, yeah. Define Splot for me. How well do you know Splot?
Not very well.
No, all right. Well, we can agree to differ on that. 5,000 is a ludicrous notion. Anyway, whatever. Look, I am. If you're trying to get me to fall down and confess with tears running from my eyes that I earn a huge amount of money, far more than most people, yes, absolutely true. That is absolutely true. Incidentally, not for just one programme, not just for the Today programme, it's for Mastermind as well, for which I have not had a pay increase in the 14 years that I've been doing it. stayed at exactly the same level, and I've never asked for any more money, and it has stayed there. It's still, I freely accept, you really don't have to try to persuade me that I'm earning a great deal of money. I'm aware of that.
It remains a sort of impossible thing for most people to understand. They're just catastrophically large sums. These are
Catastrophically, that's an interesting word, isn't it?
Well, it's sort of their pension fund sizes of funds.
It's a lot of money. It comes down a wee bit when you take tax out of it, admittedly, but nonetheless, yes, it is, of course, a lot of money. Yeah, I'm not disputing that for a moment.
Can you see yourself leaving the BBC?
Well, I can see myself probably dying. I mean, I'm not exactly a spring chicken looking for new opportunities. I would have thought it highly unlikely that I would leave the BBC to go somewhere else. Why should I? It's the best job there is.
But that's the thing, it keeps coming back to this. Why are we paying people who want to work at the BBC and can't imagine leaving so much money?
It's an interesting notion, isn't it? That you should only get a lot of money if you dislike the job you're doing.
I think
slightly peculiar, that. So if you're, I don't know, a great violinist or something, which I'm absolutely not, failed cellist perhaps, and you enjoy massively the job that you do, I dare say you massively enjoy the job that you do, are you meant to earn less?
Well, I think the violinist gets money for the rarity and uniqueness of the skill.
Absolutely, I'd agree with that. And you're quite right. There is no great rarity or uniqueness in my skill. Anybody can do it, and I've always said that, and I'll believe it. Some are maybe better at it than others, partly because of their background. They've had a bit more practice, whatever. And I am lucky enough to have survived for quite a long time. And I've done one or two other things. I mean, apart from sitting behind a studio, I mean, I have been on the road, and I've come under fire as a war correspondent, and one or two other little things. So I've done a fair bit. And the other, and maybe this is relevant, maybe it's not, but the other reason that my salary has increased the way it has is because there was a time when people like me did things like writing newspaper columns and earned quite a lot for it. Obviously, well, not obviously, but I did. And then the BBC stopped it completely, and so there was a bit of compensation for having to stop doing what one had been doing, and the BBC accepted that. In the past, when I've been asked how much I earn, I have wanted to say so, and in the old days, I asked bosses at the BBC whether I could, and they said no, that's not the BBC's policy because of X, Y, and Z, and I have some sympathy with the BBC. I mean, the idea that the BBC should in some way be the arbiter of how public sector workers, if you count the BBC as a public sector worker, I mean, it's a slightly contentious description, isn't it? But nonetheless, how they should be the arbiter of it, I find slightly bizarre. Society decides whether people who work as nurses or doctors or teachers or firefighters or whatever it happens to be, society decides how much, or whether you're a banker or a hedge fund manager, society decides how much people should earn, and not the BBC. The BBC obviously then makes decisions as to its own staff, but the BBC is in no way, it seems to me, responsible for making these enormous decisions. And they are enormous, they are complex, and there is a serious argument to be had. Can I just finish this point? It's an important one. There is a serious argument to be had as to whether broadcasters should earn the sort of money that some of us, not that many, but some of us are earning. Of course there's a serious argument had about it. The BBC's argument is that it's a marketplace, and that will seem to many people to be a perfectly sensible position to take. There are other views, and we should have that debate.
Do you think that the line is the right place? Do you think we pay too much to broadcasters?
It's incredibly difficult, isn't it? I mean, if I had a child whose life had been saved by a brilliant doctor, or an elderly relative who'd been comforted at her deathbed by a dedicated nurse, or lived in Grenfell Towers and had been saved by a very brave firefighter, I would probably say, come on, why aren't they earning the same? The reality is it would be simply impossible for obvious economic reasons to do that. So I don't know. I mean, should broadcasters earn as much as hedge fund managers? I don't know. These are incredibly difficult decisions. Thankfully, I don't have to make them.
What is it that you think the BBC thinks is worth the money they spend on you?
I don't know what you mean.
So
What do you mean?
why? What is it that you think the BBC?
You mean what
sees?
is my special,
What is-
unique talent?
What is your special, unique talent?
I don't
that
think I've
justifies
got
the
one.
work?
I mean, I do what I do. I ask people questions of that I think, that I hope the public wants answered, and I think I do that reasonably competently. Sometimes I blow it badly. Sometimes I do it reasonably well. But I've been doing it for long enough now to have a vague idea of how to do it, I suppose. But I wouldn't claim for a second that I have any unique talent. Of course I don't. I'm a hack. I started out as a hack at the age of 15, and I've been one ever since. And I've picked up a few basic skills, but you know, it has. In the oldest cliche in the book, it's not rocket science.
If you're someone earning, you know, the average wage at home, and you sort of think you have this not very exceptional skill set, and
It's a marketplace. Look, I know you've been there several times, but we come back to this point. It's a marketplace. And if I were doing exactly the same job as a civil servant in a similar job in a civil service department, I would clearly earn less money because there are many more people who are in the civil service than there are presenting the Today programme. It is a marketplace, and in the end, if a few people, and it has to be only a few people, want you, and one of them is an independent whatever, and one of them is the BBC has taken the view that you've got to pay the going rate. What is the going rate? Who knows at the time. But if somebody else wants you, the BBC, if they want to keep you, has to maybe not match it. As I say, in my case, I've turned down higher offers, but nonetheless, they've got to be somewhere within that ballpark. Difficult.